The dressing room smelled of ozone and crushed lavender, a scent engineered to calm the nervous systems of the high nobility. But it was doing nothing for High Diplomat Ilara Valryan. She stood before a mirror that spanned the height of the wall, staring at a reflection that felt increasingly like a stranger. Her skin, usually a pale, iridescent violet that shifted with her mood, was currently locked in a flat, muted gray, the color of resignation. Vesper, her attendant and closest friend, adjusted the hem of the ceremonial gown. The fabric was a weave of traditional silk and light-refracting synthetic fibers, designed to make Ilara look not just like a woman, but like a celestial event. Vesper tugged a little too hard on a strap. "Stop fidgeting," she said, her voice dry and devoid of the reverence the other servants displayed. "You look like a statue, which I suppose is the point. If you move too much, the humans might realize you are biological and not just a very expensive trophy." Ilara let out a breath that she had been holding for what felt like an hour. "Do not make me laugh. Vesper, the corset is tight enough to snap a rib." "Good," Vesper replied, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "A snapped rib gives you a valid medical excuse to faint during the vows. I have the medical transport on standby just in case." Ilara turned her head slightly, catching the light. The shimmer returned to her cheekbones, faint but present. "This is not a joke, Vesper. The Treaty of Ophiuchus hangs by a thread. If I do not walk out there, 3 star systems go back to turning each other into asteroid fields." Vesper's expression softened, losing its sharp, protective edge for a fleeting second. "It is a bad bargain. Ilara, you are trading your life for a ceasefire that might last 6 months." Ilara turned back to the mirror. She touched the cold glass, tracing the line of her own jaw. "It has to last longer than that. It has to." The door chimed, a harsh, rhythmic sound that signaled the arrival of the guards. It was time. The political machinery of 2 civilizations was grinding into motion, and Ilara was the lubricant intended to keep the gears from seizing. The hallway leading to the Grand Concourse was lined with the elite guards of both the Sylphan Ascendancy and the United Earth Coalition. They stood shoulder to shoulder, alternating species. One tall, slender alien in flowing ceramic armor. One stocky human in matte black tactical gear. It was meant to symbolize unity. To Ilara, it looked like a row of teeth in a predator's jaw. She walked with the gliding grace that had been drilled into her since birth. Her heart, however, was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was thinking of the last time she had walked a hall like this, 5 years ago. She had not been alone then. Ryan had been beside her, his hand brushing hers when no one was looking, his mind buzzing with theories about slipstream mechanics and the poetry of star death. Ryan was gone, vanished into the accretion disk of a collapsed star during a survey mission that went wrong. Or so the official report said. The grief was a dull ache that had become a permanent part of her anatomy, like a phantom limb. She reached the massive double doors of the balcony. The roar of the crowd outside was audible even through the soundproofing, a chaotic ocean of noise. A voice boomed over the public address system, amplified to reach the millions gathered in the plaza below and the billions watching via hyperlink across the sector. "Citizens of the Coalition and children of the Ascendancy," the voice intoned, deep and trembling with manufactured gravitas. "Behold the dawn of a new era." The doors groaned open. The light was blinding. Ilara stepped out. The roar became physical, a wall of sound that slammed into her. Below, the plaza was a sea of faces, banners, and holographic streamers. Blue for Earth, silver for Silpha. They were cheering for peace. They were cheering for survival. She forced the smile onto her face. It was a muscle memory, a shield she had forged over years of diplomatic receptions. She waved, her hand moving with precise, elegant control. Then, the announcer continued, to seal the blood bond between our peoples and to ensure that the fires of war never again consume our borders, the High Council has issued a royal decree. Ilara froze. This was the moment. The script was locked. The announcer's voice grew louder, echoing off the skyscrapers of the station city. By the authority of the Joint Command, High Diplomat Ilara Valryan is hereby ordered to marry General Kalen Vance, hero of the Titan sector, protector of the core, ordered to marry. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. The phrasing was archaic, brutal in its lack of nuance. She was ordered to marry a general. Cameras floated around her like microscopic gnats, their lenses zooming in to catch every micro-expression. They wanted tears of joy. They wanted the blush of a blushing bride. Ilara's hands, hidden within the folds of her luminous gown, began to tremble. It was not fear, exactly. It was a hollow dread, a sudden realization of the sheer scale of the cage that had just snapped shut around her. She was no longer a diplomat. She was territory. She was a treaty with a heartbeat. To her right, a heavy boot stepped onto the balcony. General Kalen Vance did not glide. He walked with the heavy planted gait of a man who was used to gravity fighting him. He wore the dress uniform of the coalition, stark gray with gold piping, his chest a mosaic of ribbons and medals that caught the harsh stadium lights. He stopped 3 feet from her. He did not wave to the crowd. He stood at parade rest, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. He was younger than the propaganda posters made him look, perhaps in his late 30s, but his eyes were old. They were the color of slate, tired and watchful. He looked at her. For a second, the cheering crowd faded. "I am sorry," he said. His voice was low, a rumble that the microphones did not pick up. Ilara blinked, her forced smile faltering by a millimeter. "Excuse me? I said I am sorry," Vance repeated, looking forward at the screaming masses. "I did not write the speech. It was not the opening she had expected." Ilara tightened her grip on her own fingers. "Do not apologize, General, just play your part." "I am not an actor," he muttered, finally raising a hand in a stiff, reluctant wave that sent the crowd into a fresh frenzy. "I know," Ilara whispered, the dread settling into a cold knot in her stomach. "That is what worries me. 200 floors below the balcony, in a room shielded by 3 layers of lead and a scrambling field that made electronic surveillance impossible. The architects of the wedding sat in comfortable leather chairs. Admiral Graves poured a measure of amber liquid into a glass. He was a large man, his neck thick with muscle and arrogance. Across from him sat High Lord Tsar, a sylphan noble whose elongated fingers tapped a silent rhythm on the table. "They look good together," Graves said, gesturing to the wall screen where the broadcast played. "The public is eating it up. Approval ratings for the defense budget are up 12% in the last hour." Tsar nodded slowly. "The narrative is compelling. Beauty and the Beast, the delicate flower and the iron shield. It touches the sentimental centers of the lower castes." "And the timetable?" Graves asked, taking a sip. "Unchanged," Tsar replied. "Let them have the wedding. Let the hope bloom. It will make the betrayal all the more devastating." Graves grinned, a shark-like expression. "Terran Dynamics has the new fleet prototypes ready to roll off the line in 3 months. We need the border skirmish to start exactly 2 weeks after the honeymoon." "It will," Tsar promised. "We will arrange a breach of the neutral zone, a sylphan frigate firing on a human transport. Tragic. Unavoidable." "And the general?" Graves asked. He is stubborn. He actually believes in the peace. Tsar waved a hand dismissively. The general is a tool. He will do what he is told. And the girl is merely the fuse. Once we light her, the explosion will justify 100 years of profitable conflict. Graves raised his glass. To the happy couple. Tsar did not smile. To the war. The reception was a blur of noise and light. Ilara felt as though she were floating outside her body, watching herself shake hands, accept compliments, and nod at endless toasts. General Vance stayed close to her, a silent, brooding shadow. He navigated the room with the efficiency of a soldier clearing a building, steering them away from drunken senators and overly aggressive journalists. Behind them, Lieutenant Miller, the general's aide, walked in step with Vesper. Miller was a woman of sharp angles and short hair, clutching a datapad like a weapon. "If that senator tries to hug him again," Miller murmured, "I am going to taser him." "Please do," Vesper replied, holding a tray of drinks that she was drinking herself. "It would liven up the evening. I give it 20 minutes before the general snaps and declares martial law on the buffet table." "He is disciplined," Miller said defensively. "He looks like he is chewing glass." Vesper countered. "Ahead of them." Ilara paused. A wave of dizziness washed over her, sudden and violent. The room seemed to tilt. For a split second, the chatter of the guests stretched out, deep and slow, like a recording played at half speed. The lights flickered, turning from warm gold to a cold, harsh blue, then back again. Ilara stumbled. Vance's hand was on her elbow instantly, steadying her. His grip was firm but not painful. "Are you all right?" Ilara blinked, shaking her head. The room was normal again. The nausea vanished as quickly as it had arrived. I do not know. Did you feel that?" "Feel what?" Vance asked, his brow furrowing. "The distortion," Ilara whispered. "It felt like a pressure drop, like a jump drive engaging too close to the hull." Vance looked around the room. The guests were laughing, eating, oblivious. "The environmental systems are stable. I checked them myself before we arrived. You are exhausted. It has been a long day." Ilara pulled her arm away gently. It was not exhaustion. It felt familiar. She reached into the hidden pocket of her gown and touched the small, cold object she always carried. It was a shard of distinct metal, a piece of a relic Ryan had found on the edge of the dead sector. He had given it to her the day before he left. "It sings, Ilara," he had told her. "If you listen close enough, it sings the song of the universe before time began." The shard was vibrating. It was a faint, high-frequency buzz that traveled up her fingertips and settled in her bones. "Excuse me," Ilara said, her voice trembling slightly. "I need a moment." She turned and walked toward the private sector of the hall, ignoring the concerned look Vance shot Miller. The private suite reserved for the couple was an oasis of silence. Ilara entered and leaned against the closed door, closing her eyes. The vibration in her pocket stopped the moment she was alone. She pulled the shard out. It was dull gray, inert. She let out a frustrated sigh. "Am I losing my mind? Ryan, is that what this is?" The door opened, and Vance stepped in. He stopped when he saw her holding the shard. "I knocked," he said. "You did not answer." "I was thinking," Ilara said, slipping the shard back into her pocket. Vance walked over to a side table and poured a glass of water. He offered it to her. She took it, their fingers brushing. His hands were rough, scarred from plasma burns and shrapnel. "Look," Vance began, crossing his arms. "We need to get one thing straight. I did not ask for this." "I know," Ilara said, taking a sip. You are the hero of Titan. You want to be on a bridge, commanding a fleet, not babysitting a diplomat in a dress. Vance huffed, a sound that might have been a laugh if he were capable of it. I do not want to command a fleet either. I want to retire to a colony world where the only thing I have to fight is bad weather. But the High Command made it clear. This marriage is the only thing keeping the hawkish factions in the Senate from authorizing a preemptive strike on your home world. Ilara looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. Beneath the metals and the stiffness, she saw a man who was deeply, profoundly tired. My government is the same, she admitted. The traditionalists believe humanity is a virus. They want to glass your colonies to ensure our purity. This alliance is a desperate measure. So we are stuck, Vance said. We are, Ilara agreed. Vance walked to the window, looking out at the star field. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled a small device from his belt, tapped a button, and placed it on the table. It emitted a soft, white noise hum. They are listening, he said quietly. Ilara froze. Who? Everyone, Vance said, keeping his back to the window. My intelligence services, your royal guard, the contractors who built this station. There are probably 5 different bugs in this room right now. Ilara stared at the device. Why are you telling me this? Because if we are going to survive this arrangement, Vance said, turning to face her, we cannot be blind. They want us to be puppets. They want us to smile, wave, and read the lines they wrote. And you do not want to be a puppet? Vance's eyes hardened. I am a soldier, Lady Ilara. I follow orders, but I do not like being used as bait. And I have a feeling that is exactly what we are. Ilara felt a strange, reluctant respect bloom in her chest. It was not trust. Trust was a dangerous luxury. But it was a start. So, she said, lowering her voice, we are allies? Vance looked at her. Let us start with not being enemies. The moment was interrupted by the chime of the door. Vesper burst in, looking flustered, which was entirely out of character for her. My lady, Vesper said breathlessly, you need to see this. Vance stepped forward, his hand instinctively dropping to the sidearm he wasn't wearing. What is it? Not you, Vesper said sharply. Her. Ilara moved past the general. What is it? Vesper? Vesper held up a datapad. It was an old, battered model, one that Ilara used for personal encryptions. I picked up a signal, Vesper whispered. It is bouncing off the relay near the wormhole of Kolas. It is faint, buried under layers of static and cosmic radiation. Kolas? Ilara felt the blood drain from her face. That was where Ryan had vanished. That sector is a graveyard. Nothing transmits from there. This is not a standard transmission, Vesper said. She tapped the screen. Look at the encryption key. Ilara looked. The code was not a sequence of numbers. It was a phrase, written in an ancient Sylphan dialect that only a handful of scholars and one specific pilot knew. The stars are cold, but I am burning. Ilara grabbed the datapad, her hands shaking so hard she nearly dropped it. My lady, Vance asked, his voice stepping into command mode. What is that? Ilara could not speak. The world narrowed down to those words on the screen. It was impossible. He was dead. The physics of the collapse left no survivors. But the phrase. He had whispered it to her the night before he left. It was their promise. A promise that distance and time were irrelevant. Is it a threat? Vance asked, moving closer, his eyes scanning the datapad. Ilara looked up at him. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of terror and an agonizing, impossible hope. No, she whispered, her voice breaking. It is not a threat. She looked back at the screen. The signal pulsed again, stronger this time. It is a ghost. As she spoke, the lights in the room flickered again. The hum of the station's engines deepened, groaning as if under a sudden, massive strain. The white noise generator on the table sparked and died. Ilara clutched the datapad to her chest. The marriage, the treaty, the war, it all faded. He was out there, and he was calling her name. The heavy, ornate doors of the diplomatic suite were locked. But to Vesper, a lock was merely a suggestion made by someone with a lack of imagination. Inside the dimly lit room, the air hummed with the heat of unauthorized computing. Ilara knelt on the floor, the silk of her nightgown pooling around her like liquid mercury. Before her lay the star map. It was an antique, a sphere of etched crystal that predated the holographic projection grids currently used by the Coalition navigators. Ryan had found it in a bazaar on the Fringe Worlds, a place where history was sold by the kilo. "The new maps show you where you are going," he had told her, his eyes reflecting the starlight caught in the glass. "This one shows you where the stars used to be. It remembers." Now, it was their only guide. "Connect the tertiary node to the data stream," Ilara whispered, her fingers tracing the jagged line of the Colas sector on the crystal surface. Vesper, sitting cross-legged with a mess of cables spanning from her datapad to the map's base, let out a sharp hiss. "I am trying. But the Coalition firewalls are thick. They treat navigation data like state secrets, and if I push too hard, the station AI will flag us as a security breach." "Push," Ilara said. Vesper tapped a command. The crystal sphere pulsed. A beam of light shot up from the center, filling the room with a swirling projection of the galaxy. It was beautiful and terrifying. Red warning markers blinked around the border zones. There. Ilara pointed to a cluster of dead stars near the disputed wormhole. The signal origin. "It is drifting," Vesper noted, her brow furrowed. "Yesterday it was in the gravity well of the binary system. Now it is barely inside the event horizon of the anomaly. That is impossible. The tidal forces there would crush a ship in seconds, unless the ship is not subject to normal physics," Ilara murmured. "The code, Vesper, is it still repeating?" Vesper nodded. "The stars are cold, but I am burning. It is on a loop. But look at the timestamp." Ilara leaned in. The timestamp was fluctuating. One moment it read as current, the next, it claimed the signal was sent 3 years ago. Then, 10 years in the future. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Ryan, what have you touched?" A sharp chime from the door froze them both. It was not the request chime of a servant. It was the override alert of a command key. "Hide it!" Ilara hissed. Vesper scrambled to yank the cables, but the door slid open before the projection could fade. General Vance stood in the threshold. He was not in his dress uniform. He wore a simple black fatigue shirt and trousers, the attire of a man who had been working, not sleeping. He looked at the swirling galaxy filling the room, then at the tangled cables, and finally at Ilara. His face was an impassive mask, but his eyes were sharp. "You are leaking radiation," he said calmly. Ilara stood up, smoothing her gown, trying to summon the imperious dignity of a high diplomat while standing in the middle of an illicit surveillance operation. "General, I was not expecting visitors." "Evidently," Vance said. He stepped into the room, the door sliding shut behind him. He walked through the hologram of a nebula, the light playing across his scarred features. The station's internal sensors picked up an unauthorized high-band transmission coming from this suite. Security assumed it was a glitch. I told them I would handle it personally. He looked at Vesper, who was clutching her datapad like a shield. "If you are going to slice into the naval navigation grid, Lieutenant, you should route your request through the sanitation subsystem. Nobody monitors the waste recycling logs. Vesper blinked, her mouth opening and closing silently. Ilara stepped between them. Why are you here? Vance, to arrest us? Vance looked at the crystal map. He reached out, his hand passing through the ghostly image of the Colas wormhole. I saw the coordinates, he said, his voice low. That is a restricted zone. No ships go there. Not ours, not yours. We received a distress call, Ilara said, deciding that a partial truth was safer than a lie. I know, Vance said. Ilara stiffened. You know? I have my own ghost frequencies, Vance replied. I heard the signal. I did not recognize the code, but I recognized the signature of the encryption. It is Sylphan, but modified with older tech. He turned to look at her. If I report this, the intelligence division will tear this room apart. They will confiscate that map, arrest your attendant, and place you in confinement for violating the pre-wedding security protocols. And yet, you are here alone, Ilara said, studying him. Why? Vance sighed, the sound of a man carrying too much weight. Because I checked the logs. That signal. It is beaming directly to you, personal. And I do not think you are conspiring to blow up the station. Lady Ilara, I think you are haunting yourself. He tapped a sequence on his wrist comm. I am looping the sensor feed. As far as security is concerned, your tea kettle malfunctioned and caused a power spike. He turned to leave. General, Ilara called out. He paused at the door. Thank you, she said. He did not look back. Use the sanitation logs next time. The following week was a blur of calculated pageantry. The pre-wedding tour was designed to be a relentless assault of optimism, a traveling circus of diplomacy meant to sell the lie that love could conquer orbital bombardment. They traveled to the capital city of the human colony on Aurum Prime. The air was thick and smelled of industrial exhaust and blooming lilacs, a jarring combination that perfectly summarized the human aesthetic. There were parades, endless, deafening parades. Ilara sat in an open-topped hovercar next to Vance, waving until her shoulder ached. The crowds were massive. Humans and Sylphans stood side by side, waving flags, throwing flowers, cheering for the Union. Ilara looked at the faces. They looked desperate. They were not cheering for a wedding. They were cheering for the promise that their sons and daughters would not be drafted into another meat grinder war. Smile, Vance murmured, not moving his lips. The drone cameras are on your left. I am smiling, Ilara replied through gritted teeth. It looks like you are in pain. My shoes are too small and the air quality here is atrocious. Vance actually chuckled, a dry, rusty sound. Welcome to the Coalition. Between the parades, there were the diplomatic showcases, receptions held in guild halls and governors' mansions, where the wine was expensive and the conversation was lethal. It was at the reception in the floating gardens of Aurum that the threat came. Ilara had stepped away from the main group to admire a bioluminescent orchid. The shadows of the garden were deep, providing a momentary respite from the flashbulbs. A figure emerged from the gloom. It was High Minister Vrook, a Sylphan bureaucrat with skin the color of bruised plums and eyes that held no warmth. He was a member of the Royal Council, technically her inferior, but he carried the weight of the old families who despised the treaty. High Diplomat, Vrook said, bowing just low enough to be polite, but not low enough to show respect. You look radiant. The human fashion suits you. It disguises your heritage well. Minister Vrook, Ilara replied, her voice cooling. I did not know you were part of the delegation. I am here to ensure that our interests are protected, Vrook said, stepping closer. He smelled of cloying perfume and rot. There are rumors, my lady. Rumors that you are hesitant, that you have been making inquiries into matters that are best left dead. Ilara held her ground. I do not know what you mean. Vrook smiled, revealing needle-thin teeth. The signal. Ilara, we know about the signal, and we know you are listening. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. Let the dead stay dead. If you pursue this, if you delay the ceremony or cause a scene, there are 3 civilian colonies in the outer rim that rely on our supply convoys for atmosphere filtration. Accidents happen. Filters fail. It would be a tragedy if thousands suffocated because their princess was chasing a ghost. Ilara felt a spike of cold rage. You would threaten your own people? We prioritize the survival of the many, Vrook said, stepping back. Be a good bride, Ilara. Walk the aisle, say the words, or the suffocation begins. He melted back into the shadows just as Vesper appeared, holding 2 glasses of sparkling nectar. Who was that? Vesper asked, eyeing the retreating figure. A reminder, Ilara said, taking a glass and draining it in one swallow, that we are walking on a knife's edge. Later that evening, Vance introduced her to his inner circle. It was an informal dinner in the officers' mess of the flagship Aegis, which was escorting the diplomatic convoy. The room was stark, utilitarian metal softening only by the dim lighting. Vance sat at the head of the table. To his right was Ilara. Around them sat the men and women who commanded the coalition's fleets. Captain Halloway was a young man with bright eyes and a fervent belief in the propaganda. General, he said, raising his glass. To the Alliance, the integration of Sylphan shield tech with our hull plating is going to revolutionize the fleet. We will be invincible. It is a peacekeeping treaty, Captain, Ilara corrected gently. Not a weapons contract. Halloway blinked, surprised by her directness. Of course, my lady. But peace is best maintained through superior firepower. Across the table, Colonel Rask snorted. Rask was an older woman, her face a roadmap of scars, her cybernetic eye whirring softly as it focused on Ilara. Peace, she grumbled. We are inviting the fox into the henhouse. No offense. High diplomat, none taken. Colonel, Ilara said coolly. Though in my culture the metaphor involves a serpent and a cradle, we are just as wary of your kinetic cannons as you are of our plasma arrays. Rask stared at her. Then a slow grin spread across her face. At least she is honest. Vance, the last diplomat they sent tried to tell me that Sylphans do not understand the concept of violence. I told him to look at the crater on Moon 7. I understand violence very well. Colonel, Ilara said, her gaze steady. I also understand that exhaustion kills more empires than invasions do. We are both tired. That is why I am here. Vance took a sip of his water, hiding a faint smile. He looked at his officers. The lady speaks for herself. Treat her with the same respect you give me. Or what? Rask challenged, though without malice. Or you can explain to the Admiralty why you were demoted to garbage scow duty, Vance said flatly. The table laughed. It was a rough, jagged sound, but it was genuine. Ilara realized then that these people loved him, not because he was a hero, but because he was one of them. And by defending her, he was signaling that she was under his protection. It was a complicated respect. He was not cruel. He was practical. And she was not naive. She knew that his protection was as much about mission success as it was about kindness. But in a galaxy of sharks, a practical shield was better than nothing. The night before the convoy was set to depart for the wedding venue, Ilara found herself unable to sleep. She wandered out onto the private balcony of the governor's mansion. The city of Aurum Prime sprawled below, a grid of amber lights stretching to the horizon. She heard the heavy tread of boots behind her. She did not turn. "You should be sleeping, General." "So should you," Vance replied, coming to stand beside her. He leaned his forearms on the railing, looking out at the city he had defended 3 times in the last decade. "I feel like a fabrication," Ilara admitted, her voice barely audible over the wind, like the banners they hung in the square, a 2-dimensional image of a person. Vance remained silent for a long moment. "That is the job," he said finally. "Is it?" Ilara looked at him. "Is that who you are? The hero of Titan? The Iron General?" Vance looked down at his hands. "I never wanted a spouse chosen by committee. Ilara, I grew up on a farm in the Agribelt. I wanted to grow wheat. I wanted to marry a girl named Sarah who lived down the road. What happened to her?" "The war happened," Vance said simply. "The first border skirmish. The bombardment took out the whole valley. I joined the academy the next day." "I am sorry," Ilara said softly. "Do not be," Vance said. "It was a lifetime ago. But I know what it feels like to be hollowed out and filled up with duty." He turned his head to look at her. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face, softening the harsh lines. They stood close, the space between them charged with a strange, quiet electricity. It wasn't the fiery passion she had felt with Ryan. It was something heavier, a shared gravity. Her hand rested on the railing. His hand was inches away. If she moved her pinky finger, she would touch him. The ache of responsibility was a physical weight in her chest. She wanted to lean into him, not for romance, but for the simple comfort of another solid object in a world that was dissolving. "You are doing well," he said. "Better than I expected." "You expected me to crumble?" "I expected you to be a princess," he said. "You are a soldier. You just wear better clothes." Ilara laughed, a short, breathless sound. "And you, General, you are surprisingly human." Vance looked at her, his slate eyes intense. "We are going to get through this. I will not let them suffocate the colonies, and I will not let them break you. For a moment, just a moment." Ilara believed him. The morning brought a return to chaos. The convoy was a massive serpentine line of armored hover transports moving through the mountain pass toward the spaceport. Ilara sat in the lead vehicle with Vance, Miller, and Vesper. The mood was tense. News feeds were scrolling on the internal monitors. "Breaking news," the anchor announced, her face grave. "Intelligence sources have uncovered a link between the alien separatist movement and high-ranking members of the Sylphan delegation. Evidence suggests that encrypted comms have been exchanged with terrorist cells." Ilara stared at the screen. "That is a lie." "It is a setup," Vance said grimly, scanning his tactical display. "They are planting the narrative. If anything happens now, they can blame it on your radicalized connections." Vesper was typing furiously on her data pad. "They are tracing the signal we found. They are twisting it, making it look like I was contacting a weapon smuggler instead of a distress beacon." Before Ilara could respond, the world turned white. A massive explosion rocked the transport, flipping the 50-ton vehicle onto its side like a toy. Metal screamed as the chassis skidded along the highway, sparks showering the interior. Ilara was thrown against her restraints, the breath knocked out of her. The lights died, replaced by the red strobe of emergency backups. "Contact front!" Miller screamed, kicking open the warped rear hatch. Vance was moving instantly. He cut Ilara's harness with a combat knife, his arm wrapping around her waist. "Move! We are a sitting duck in here!" They scrambled out of the wreckage into the biting wind of the mountain pass. The convoy was in flames. Black smoke billowed into the sky. Figures in dark combat armor were descending from the ridges on zip lines, firing plasma rifles. "Extremists!" Holloway shouted over the comms, firing back from behind a burning jeep. Ilara crouched behind a barrier of fallen rock, coughing in the acrid smoke. She looked at the attackers. They moved with precise, synchronized efficiency. Their armor was matte black, devoid of markings, but she saw the shimmer of their personal shields. "Vance!" she shouted, pointing. "Look at their shields! That is a triphasic harmonic cycle." Vance fired 3 controlled bursts, dropping an attacker, then ducked back as plasma scorched the rock above his head. He looked at where she pointed. "Triphasic," he muttered. "That is not terrorist tech. That is Coalition Special Ops prototype gear, or Sylphan Royal Guard." It is an inside job, Ilara realized, the horror cold in her veins. They are attacking their own convoy to prove I am a traitor. "We need to move," Vance growled. He grabbed her hand. "Run!" They sprinted toward a narrow ravine, the only cover available. The air around them sizzled with energy fire. Vance moved with terrifying speed, his body constantly shifting to shield her. He wasn't just fighting, he was shepherding her. An attacker dropped from a ledge directly in front of them, a vibroblade humming in his hand. Vance didn't hesitate. He slammed into the man, using his own momentum to drive the attacker into the rock wall. There was a sickening crunch, and the attacker slumped. Vance didn't look back. He pulled Ilara up the scree slope, Miller and Vesper close behind providing covering fire. They reached a small cave, a geological fissure that offered temporary safety. Vance checked his ammo counter, his chest heaving. "Is everyone hit?" he demanded. "I am fine," Vesper gasped, clutching her side. "Just a bruise." Ilara leaned against the cold stone wall, her gown torn and stained with soot. She looked at Vance. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but he looked energized, focused. "You saved me," she said. Vance wiped the blood from his eye. "Do not thank me yet. We are miles from the spaceport and our comms are jammed." Ilara looked down at Vesper's datapad, which was miraculously still functioning. The screen was flickering wildly. "The signal," Vesper whispered. "It is back." Ilara looked. The distress signal from Ryan was pulsing again, but the coordinates had changed. "That is impossible," Miller said, looking over Vesper's shoulder. "Those coordinates, that is inside the planetary crust of Aurum, and simultaneously in the upper atmosphere." "It is bilocating?" Ilara asked. "No," Vance said, staring at the screen. "Look at the timestamp again." The timestamp was not just fluctuating, it was scrolling, past, present, future. And then, the cave changed. For a heartbeat, the stone walls vanished. Ilara saw a flash of a grand cathedral made of chrome and glass, a place she had never been. She saw Vance, but he was wearing a different uniform, one covered in blood. She saw herself screaming, but there was no sound. Then, snap. Back to the cave. "Did you see that?" Ilara gasped, stumbling. Vance grabbed her shoulder to steady her. His hand felt cold, then hot, then solid. "I saw it," he said, his voice tight. Ilara looked at her shadow on the cave wall. The emergency flare Miller held cast a long, dancing shadow. But Ilara's shadow was lagging behind her movement by a full 2 seconds. She raised her hand. The shadow remained still, then raised its hand slowly. "Echoes," Ilara whispered. "Time is bleeding." Vesper held up the datapad. "The signal. It is not just a distress call anymore. It is a beacon, and it is getting louder." A voice whispered through the cave. It did not come from the datapad. It came from the air itself, vibrating the dust motes. "Ordered to marry. Heart, die. It was Alara's voice, but she hadn't spoken. Vance drew his weapon, aiming at the empty air. What is that? That is me, Ilara said, terror and awe warring in her eyes. That is me, saying something I have not said yet. The ground beneath them shuddered, not from an explosion but from a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to come from the core of the planet or from the core of the universe itself. He is here, Ilara said. Not just on the map. He is here. The cave mouth darkened as night fell outside, but the shadows inside the cave began to detach themselves from the walls, moving independently. Vance looked at Ilara, then at the impossible shadows. Whatever is coming, he said, gripping his rifle, it is not following the rules. No, Ilara replied, looking into the dark. It is rewriting them. The darkness inside the cave did not disperse. It reorganized. The shadows that had been peeling away from the rock walls did not fade when the emergency flare sputtered and died. Instead, they coalesced, pulling together with a fluid, terrifying purpose, knitting themselves into the shape of a man. Ilara stood frozen, her heart hammering a rhythm that felt too fast for her chest. She knew the silhouette. She knew the tilt of the head, the way the shoulders set against the world. But the air around him was wrong. It crackled with a static charge that made the hair on her arms stand up. And the dust motes floating in the shaft of light from the cave entrance seemed to slow down as they neared him, suspended in a jelly of distorted time. Ryan stepped forward. He was not the boy who had quoted poetry to her in the royal gardens 5 years ago. That boy had been soft edges and bright eyes. This man was sharpened flint. He wore a ragged flight suit that had been patched with materials Ilara did not recognize. Shimmering, oil-slick fabrics that seemed to absorb the dim light. His face was gaunt, the skin drawn tight over his cheekbones, and a scar ran from his temple to his jaw, pulsating with a faint, rhythmic blue light, as if a vein of neon ran beneath the dermis. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. They were no longer just dark, they were abyssal. They held the flat, unblinking stare of someone who had looked into the maw of a singularity and learned not to look away. He did not rush to her. He did not cry out. He simply stopped 3 paces away, occupying the space with a heaviness that felt like increased gravity. General Vance had his rifle raised, the barrel steady, aimed squarely at the intruder's chest. "Who are you?" Vance barked, his voice echoing off the stone. "Identify." Ryan did not look at the gun. He looked only at Ilara. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until the sound of the wind outside seemed to belong to a different world entirely. "Ilara?" Ryan said. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding under a boot, but it carried a harmonic undertone, a doublespeak that vibrated in her teeth. Ilara took a step forward, ignoring Vance's warning hand. "Ryan? Is it you?" He tilted his head. "I am the one who came back. Whether that is the same as the one who left is a question for the physicists." He reached out a hand. His fingers were stained with grease and something that looked like dried void tar. Ilara did not hesitate. She closed the distance and gripped his hand. His skin was fever-hot, burning with a dry intensity that made her gasp. The contact sent a shockwave through her. It wasn't just physical. It was a flood of sensation, relief so profound it felt like collapsing, anger that scorched her throat, and a desire that woke every dormant nerve ending in her body. She felt painfully, violently alive. "You are late," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You are 5 years late." "I was held," Ryan said. "Time moves differently where they kept me." He looked down at their joined hands, then up into her eyes. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not apologize for the years of silence. Instead, he asked the one question that could shatter her. Do you still belong to yourself, Ilara? Or have they sold the last piece of you? The question hung in the air, more dangerous than the plasma rifle aimed at his heart. It cut through the diplomatic training, the royal conditioning, the layers of compromise she had wrapped herself in to survive. Ilara gripped his hand tighter, her nails digging into his palm. I am still here, she said fiercely. I am still me. Good, Ryan said, because I am going to burn the rest of it down. Step away from him. Lady Ilara, Vance ordered, his finger tightening on the trigger. He moved sideways, keeping a clear line of fire while putting himself between the entrance and the pair. I will not ask again. Who are you? Ryan finally turned his gaze to the general. He looked at the weapon with mild curiosity, as if it were an antique toy. General Kalen Vance, hero of Titan, the man who holds the line. I know who I am, Vance said coldly. I want to know why you are glowing and why you just walked out of a solid rock wall. I did not walk through the wall, Ryan corrected calmly. I walked around it. You just lacked the perception to see the path. He released Ilara's hand slowly, the loss of contact leaving her skin tingling. I am Ryan Kalar, former flight navigator for the Royal Survey Corps, currently fugitive. Vance lowered the rifle slightly, his eyes narrowing. Kalar, the dead fiancé? I have been better, Ryan admitted. He reached into his flight suit. Vance's rifle snapped back up. Ryan paused, showing his empty palms, then slowly withdrew a small, jagged device. It looked like a prism constructed from black glass, with internal gears that seemed to spin in impossible directions. You want to know where I have been? General? Ryan asked. I was a guest of the Shadow Council. They have a facility near the event horizon of the Colas wormhole. They call it the Black Box. It is where they test the toys that are too illegal for the regular military. He tossed the device to Vance. The general caught it with his free hand. It was heavy, impossibly dense. What is this? Vance asked. A causality engine, Ryan said. Or a piece of one. They strapped me into the prototype. They wanted to see if a sylphan mind could navigate the probability streams better than an AI. They wanted to know if they could send a ship not just across space, but across consequence. Ilara stared at Ryan, horror dawning. They tortured you? With time? They broke time, Ryan said, his voice devoid of self-pity. And I picked up the pieces. I saw the shape of the war they are planning. Ilara, it is not just a border skirmish. They are engineering a collapse that will force both civilizations into 100 years of martial law. The wedding is the trigger. You are the trigger. Vance looked at the device, then at Ryan. You have proof? Ryan smiled, a sharp, terrifying expression. I have more than proof. I have the receipts, and I am about to file a return. He tapped the side of his own head. I kept the connection open. The engine is still running in the black box, but I have the administrative privileges now. What are you going to do? Ilara asked. I am going to introduce a little chaos into their system, Ryan said. Revenge beyond logic. He closed his eyes. The blue scar on his face flared bright white. 5,000 miles away, on the orbital stock exchange of Aurum Prime, the main trading board flickered. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in the financial district. Then, simultaneously, every screen in the trading floor turned black. A second later, they rebooted, but the data was wrong. A news headline flashed across the ticker. Defense contractor Aerospace Dynamics indicted for war crimes. Date, 3 weeks from now. Traders stared. The date on the headline was in the future. Then another headline appeared, stamped with a date from 2 years ago. Secret recordings reveal Admiral Graves accepting bribes from Sylphan separatists. The audio files attached to the headline began to play over the public address system. It was Admiral Graves' voice, clear as day, discussing the price of a staged chemical attack on a civilian colony. Then, the contradictions started. A third headline appeared. Admiral Graves awarded Medal of Honor for saving colony. Two realities, mutually exclusive, were being broadcast as absolute truth at the same exact moment. The algorithms that ran the market panicked. They couldn't reconcile the data. The automated trading bots began to sell everything, terrified by the conflicting causality. In the royal palace on the Sylphan homeworld, the High Council chamber doors locked themselves. The holographic records in the center of the room began to project video logs of secret meetings where the counselors discussed the assassination of Alara's father, the late king. But in the same projection, a second video played overlaid on the first, showing the counselors innocent, mourning the king. It was a deep-fake reality storm. Back in the cave, Ryan opened his eyes. He exhaled a breath that smoked in the cold air. "It has begun," he said softly. Vance tapped his earpiece. It was screaming with static and panicked chatter from his command squad. "General!" The voice of his comms officer broke through. "Command is down. The subnet is flooding with conflicting intel. We have reports that the war started yesterday, and other reports that it starts next week. The civilian net is crashing." Vance killed the volume on the earpiece. He looked at Ryan with a mixture of awe and profound disturbance. "What did you do?" "I leaked the truth," Ryan said. "All the versions of it. The things they did, the things they planned to do, and the things they would have done if they hadn't been caught. I am letting the public decide which timeline they want to believe." "You are causing a panic," Vance said, his jaw tightening. "People will get hurt." "People are already hurt," Ryan snapped, his calm facade cracking to reveal the magma beneath. "They are grinding entire colonies into dust to boost their stock prices. A little panic on the trading floor is a small price to pay for exposing the rot." The sound of approaching engines cut the argument short. "They found us," Miller shouted from the cave entrance. "Dropship inbound." "We need to move," Vance said. He looked at Ryan. "I should arrest you. My orders are to detain any subversive elements. You just collapse the economy." Ryan looked at the general. "You can try, but I suspect you are more interested in why Admiral Graves just ordered your own execution." Vance froze. "What?" "Check your personal logs," Ryan said. "The future-dated order just hit the network. He blames you for the security failure at the convoy. You are the scapegoat. General, dead men do not defend themselves at court-martial." Vance pulled up his wrist comp. There it was. An arrest order for General Kalen Vance, authorized by Admiral Graves, citing treason and incompetence. Vance stared at the screen for a long second. Then he looked up. "We have a safe house," he said. 5 clicks north. Old mining outpost, lead-lined. He looked at Alara, then at Ryan. "We talk there. If you lie to me, Kalar, I will shoot you myself." "Fair enough," Ryan said. The mining outpost was a rusted metal blister on the side of the mountain, smelling of stale air and ancient hydraulic fluid. But it was warm, and the thick walls blocked the scanning beams of the dropship circling overhead. In the main control room, the atmosphere was thick with unresolved tension. Ryan sat on a crate, tinkering with his causality device. Vance paced the floor, checking the perimeter sensors. Alara stood between them, a focal point for the 2 gravitational forces in the room. In the corner, Lieutenant Miller and Vesper sat on the floor, sharing a ration pack. So, Vesper said, chewing on a dry cracker. My plan was to hide in a ventilation shaft and wait for the heat death of the universe. What was yours? Miller checked the charge on her sidearm. I was going to commandeer a transport and fly into the nebula. That sounds romantic, Vesper deadpanned. We could have died of radiation poisoning together. Better than dying of boredom listening to the politicians, Miller countered. She gestured to Ryan. Is he always this intense? He used to write sonnets about the color of the moons. Vesper sighed. Now he looks like he eats stars for breakfast. I miss the poetry. The humor was a thin veneer over the fear. But it helped. In the center of the room, the debate was heating up. We cannot stay here, Vance said. They will grid search the mountain. We have maybe 6 hours. We do not need 6 hours, Ryan said without looking up. The chaos I caused has bought us a window. The council is too busy fighting the accusations to coordinate a search. You destroyed the credibility of the government, Vance argued. You did not just expose the conspirators, you broke the public's trust in reality. How do we rebuild that? We do not, Ryan said, looking up. We build something new. The old system was a lie. And what replaces it? Anarchy? Vance challenged. You are a navigator, Kalar, not a statesman. You are steering the ship into a cliff because you do not like the captain. Ilara stepped forward, her voice sharp. Stop it, both of you, she looked at Ryan. He represents the wild, terrifying freedom she had mourned for years. He was the part of her that wanted to run, to burn the treaty and live for herself. She looked at Vance. He represented stability, duty, and a surprising, sturdy decency she hadn't expected to find. He was the part of her that knew actions had consequences for millions of people. It was not just a romantic choice. It was an ideological fracture. Ryan, Ilara said gently. The general is right. We cannot just burn it down. There are people living in that house. Ryan's expression softened when he looked at her, the abyssal darkness in his eyes receding slightly. I am doing this for you, Ilara, so you do not have to be a sacrifice. I never asked for a savior, Ilara said, her voice gaining strength. I asked for a partner. She turned to Vance. And you, General, you know the council is corrupt. You have seen the orders. Are you still going to follow them? Vance stopped pacing. He looked at the arrest warrant still blinking on his wrist. I swore an oath to the Constitution of the Coalition, not to Admiral Graves, not to the defense contractors. He took a deep breath. I will not arrest him, and I will not let them take you. But we need a plan that does not involve destroying the space-time continuum. Ryan stood up. He walked over to the holographic map table in the center of the room. He waved his hand, and the static cleared, replaced by a complex 3D schematic of the royal palace. The wedding is in 2 days, Ryan said. That is their deadline. They need Ilara at that altar. If she says I do, the treaty is sealed, and the secret clauses regarding the mineral rights and the military escalation go into effect. And if she doesn't, Vance asked, they will kill her and use a holographic double to finish the ceremony, Ryan said matter-of-factly. Or they will drug her until she can't speak and nod her head for her. Ilara felt a chill run down her spine. The cold logic of it was terrifying. So we stopped the wedding, Ilara said. No, Vance said, his strategist mind taking over. If we stop the wedding, the war starts anyway. They will blame the cancellation on terrorist intervention and launch the fleet. We have to let the wedding happen, Ilara realized. Vance nodded. We let them think they have won. We get you to the altar. The cameras will be there. The entire galaxy will be watching. And then, Ryan asked, his eyes narrowing. And then we tell the truth, Ilara said, not with a dossier leak, not with a deep fake, with my voice, live. Ryan shook his head. It is too dangerous. Once you are in that cathedral, you are in their kill box. I have to try, Ilara said. She looked at Ryan, her gaze intense. You learn to bend reality. Ryan, can you get us inside without them knowing? Ryan hesitated, looking at the scar on his hand. The causality engine is unstable. Every time I use it, I risk fracturing the local wormhole network. We do not need a big miracle, Vance said. Just a small one. Can you bypass their bioscanners? Ryan nodded slowly. Yes. I can edit the probability that the scanners detect weapons. I can make the probability 0. Then we go in armed, Vance said. I have a squad of loyalists I can trust. We infiltrate the ceremony as the honor guard. It is a trap, Ryan warned. It is a trap we are walking into with our eyes open, Ilara said. The three of them stood around the map. The tension was still there, the jagged edges of the triangle, but it had shifted. It was no longer a standoff. It was a formation. Ryan looked at Vance. If you betray her, General, I will retroactively erase the day you were born. I believe you, Vance said dryly. If you get us all killed with that magic box, I will haunt you. Ilara looked between them, the rebel and the soldier, the fire and the stone. She needed both. Love alone was not enough to fix an empire. It was a beautiful, fragile thing that would be crushed under the tread of a tank. Courage and strategy had to join it. The plan was set. Ryan moved to the window, looking out at the gathering storm clouds over the mountains. Ilara followed him. He turned to her. His hand reached out, hovering near her face but not touching, as if he were afraid his touch would burn her again. I missed you, he whispered. It was the first time he had sounded like the boy she knew. I missed you too, Ilara said. But we are not the same people. Ryan. No. He agreed. We are something else. Something harder. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You need to understand the stakes. Ilara, if you walk into that cathedral, there is no going back. If you stand at the altar, you will be a weapon they point at the future. They will use your image to justify 1,000 years of slaughter. Ilara looked him in the eye. She felt the fear, cold and heavy. But beneath it was a foundation of steel she hadn't known she possessed until this moment. She thought of the trembling girl on the balcony, ordered to smile. That girl was gone. She reached up and touched the glowing scar on his cheek. I know, she said. I was ordered to marry a general, but my heart was never ordered to die. Ryan covered her hand with his own. Then let us make sure they regret giving the order. Vance watched them from the console, his face unreadable. He checked his weapon one last time. Pack it up, he called out to Miller and Vesper. We have a wedding to crash. Vesper groaned, standing up and brushing crumbs from her lap. I have nothing to wear, Miller smirked, tossing her a spare ammo clip. Wear that, it goes with everything. Ilara turned back to the room. The dread was gone. The hollow feeling was filled with purpose. She was walking into the lion's den. But this time, she was bringing the lions. The week of the wedding descended upon the capital city like a gilded cage slamming shut. The sky above the royal palace was no longer visible. It was obscured by a relentless mosaic of holographic banners, news drones, and fireworks that detonated in synchronized bursts of gold and violet. To the citizens below, it looked like a celebration of the century. To Ilara, watching from the reinforced glass of her tower suite. It looked like the bars of a prison cell made of light. The air in the city vibrated with a low-frequency hum, the sound of millions of people talking, shouting, and cheering. The media narrative was being spun with terrifying efficiency. Every screen in the Coalition and the Ascendancy played a continuous loop of the star-crossed lovers, a heavily edited montage of Ilara and General Vance sharing shy glances and orchestrated touches. It was a beautiful lie, manufactured to sell a piece that was already being dismantled in the shadows. General Vance entered the suite without knocking, his face grim. He moved with the restless energy of a caged tiger, pacing the length of the room before stopping at the window. "They are accelerating the timeline," Vance said, his voice low and tight. Ilara turned from the window, her expression composed despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. "What have you found?" "My intelligence contacts in the fleet just flagged a priority movement order," Vance said. "They are moving the 7th Battle Group to the neutral zone. They are going to stage a border incident tonight. A Sylphan cruiser is going to be destroyed, and they have already written the press release." "Let me guess," Ilara said, her voice cold. "They are going to blame it on a rogue faction led by a temporal terrorist." Vance nodded. "They are going to pin it on Ryan. They have fabricated sensor logs showing a ship with his energy signature firing the first shot. Once the news hits, the public will scream for blood. Admiral Graves will order me to execute Ryan publicly to prove my loyalty and unite the populations in rage." Ilara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the climate control. It was a perfect trap. If Vance refused, he was a traitor. If he obeyed, he murdered the man she loved and sealed her fate as a puppet. "Where is he?" Ilara asked. "He is in the vents," Vance said, gesturing to the ornate ceiling. "He says the security in the main corridors is too tight, but the air recyclers are surprisingly spacious." A vent grate in the corner of the room popped open with a soft clatter. Ryan dropped down, landing in a crouch. He dusted off his knees, looking out of place in the opulent room with his scarred flight suit and the faint, shimmering aura of distortion that clung to him. "Spacious is an exaggeration," Ryan muttered. "I had to fold space 3 times just to fit past the filtration unit." He looked at Ilara, and for a second, the tension in the room softened. His eyes, dark and endless, searched hers for reassurance. She gave him a small, brave nod. "We have to move," Ryan said, his tone shifting to business. "The conspirators are holding an auction tonight." "An auction?" Ilara asked. Vance stepped forward to the holographic table, pulling up a schematic. "Not for art, for war. The Shadow Council is selling the mineral rights to the border worlds and the contracts for the new fleet production. They are dividing up the spoils of the conflict before the first shot is even fired. The auction is happening at the Underground Gala, a black market event for the ultra-wealthy." "We need that ledger," Ilara said, the pieces clicking into place. "If we can get the list of buyers and the contracts they signed, we prove the war is a business deal, not a political necessity." Ryan nodded. "But the ledger is digital, encrypted, and stored in 3 separate locations. We need to physically access the data nodes to recombine the file." 3 targets, Vance said. "The floating archive cathedral for the historical override codes, the wormhole relay station for the transmission logs, and the gala itself for the financial keys. It is a stealth run," Ryan said. "We cannot shoot our way through this. If we trip an alarm, they lock the data down and we lose everything." Ilara smoothed the silk of her gown, her hands steady. "I can get us into the gala. I know half the people on that guest list. They are the same people who smile at me at state dinners. And I can get us into the relay," Vance said. I have the command codes. What about the cathedral? Ilara asked. It is an automated vault. No humans or aliens allowed. Ryan smirked, a flash of his old, reckless charm. That is where I come in. Doors are just probability barriers. I am very good at finding the version of reality where they are unlocked. The floating archive cathedral was a monolith of silent stone and anti-gravity generators, suspended in the upper atmosphere of the planet. It was where the Ascendancy kept its oldest truths, genealogies, treaties, and star maps dating back 10,000 years. The wind howled around them as they stood on the landing platform. The air was thin and freezing. Ilara shivered, pulling her thermal cloak tighter. Vance checked the seals on his pressure suit, his rifle magnet locked to his back. The door is a molecular bond, Vance shouted over the wind. We cannot cut through it without triggering a planetary alert. Ryan stepped up to the massive, featureless slab of stone. He took a breath, and the blue scar on his face flared with light. He placed his hand on the stone. There is a version of this moment, Ryan shouted, his voice vibrating with power, where the maintenance crew left this door open 5 minutes ago. He closed his eyes. The air around his hand rippled like water disturbed by a stone. The sound of grinding rock echoed through the platform. The molecular bond didn't break. It simply ceased to have ever been sealed. The slab slid open with a groan. After you, Ryan said, leaning against the wall, looking suddenly pale. Inside, the archive smelled of ozone and dust. Rows of data crystals stretched up into the darkness, hundreds of feet high. They moved quickly. Ilara navigated the index, her fingers flying over the terminal. Here, she whispered. The original Treaty of Ophiuchus, and the amendments Graves tried to bury. She downloaded the data to a drive. As she worked, she watched Ryan. He was leaning against a pillar, his breathing shallow. Does it hurt? She asked softly. Bending the world? Ryan opened one eye. It feels like forgetting who you are piece by piece, and then having to remember it all at once. Vance was watching the door, his back to them. We are clear. Let us move to the relay. The wormhole relay station was the opposite of the archive. It was a utilitarian sphere of steel and spinning magnets, orbiting in the hard vacuum of the outer ring. They entered through a maintenance airlock. The gravity here was low, making every movement a floating, dreamlike pantomime. Vance took the lead, moving with the practiced efficiency of a zero-G combat veteran. Avoid the cameras, Vance ordered over the comms. Ryan floated behind him. He didn't hide from the cameras. He simply looked at them, and the lenses fractured, showing a loop of an empty corridor from yesterday. I am editing the feed, Ryan said, his voice tight with strain, but I cannot hold it for long. They reached the central core. The hum of the wormhole drive was deafening, a physical pressure in their skulls. Vance jacked into the mainframe, his hands moving over the keys. I have the transmission logs, Vance said. Confirmed. Admiral Graves sent the order to fire on the convoy. And... He paused. What? Ilara asked. He sent a message to the Sylphan High Command, Vance said, his voice disgusted. He gave them our shield frequencies. He is selling out his own fleet to ensure maximum casualties. That monster, Ilara hissed. Download it, Ryan said, clutching his head. The probability wave is collapsing. The cameras are about to see us. Vance yanked the drive. Move! They scrambled back to the airlock just as the red lights of the security alert began to strobe. Ryan slammed the airlock shut, and with a wave of his hand fused the locking mechanism into a solid block of steel. That should hold them. Ryan gasped, wiping blood from his nose. The underground gala was held in the sub-basement of the old fusion plant. a cavernous space retrofitted with velvet drapes, crystal chandeliers, and a floor made of polished obsidian. It was a party for the people who owned the galaxy, and business was booming. Ilara wore a mask of silver feathers that obscured her eyes but left her recognizable mouth visible. She wore a gown of midnight blue, armored with a bodice of woven titanium mesh. She looked dangerous and regal. Vance was disguised as her bodyguard, wearing the livery of a private mercenary company. Ryan was nowhere to be seen. He was the ghost in the machine, monitoring the security grid from the shadows of the ventilation system. Ilara moved through the crowd. She recognized a human senator laughing with a Sylphan arms dealer. She saw the CEO of a mining conglomerate toasting with a general from the opposition. Ilara, a voice purred. She turned. It was Lady Zilia, a notorious information broker. "Lady Zilia," Ilara said, inclining her head. "I did not expect to see you here." "Oh, darling," Zilia laughed, sipping a glass of blue wine. "War is terrible for the poor, but it is fantastic for my portfolio. I heard you were getting cold feet about the wedding." "I am simply considering my options," Ilara said, stepping closer. "I hear there is an auction tonight." Zilia's eyes narrowed behind her mask. "You are looking for the ledger." "I am looking for insurance," Ilara corrected. "If I am to be a queen, I need to know who owns the throne." Zilia smiled, a predatory expression. "The ledger is on the central server, in the back room, but it is biometrically locked to the auctioneer." "Leave that to me," Ilara said. She signaled Vance. He created a distraction, bumping into a waiter and sending a tray of drinks crashing into a group of dignitaries. In the confusion, Ilara slipped into the back corridor. The server room was guarded by two massive droids. Ilara didn't fight them. She didn't need to. "Ryan," she whispered into her comm. The droids suddenly stopped. Their heads turned to look at each other. Then, they began to dance, a clumsy, mechanical waltz. Ryan's voice crackled in her ear, sounding exhausted. "Probability that combat droids are programmed to waltz is 0, unless I say otherwise." Ilara slipped past them. She found the server, jacked in the drive, and downloaded the final piece of the puzzle, the financial records, the proof that the war was bought and paid for. "Got it," she whispered. "Get out," Vance's voice cut in. "They know you are there." Ilara turned to run, but the door blocked her path. It wasn't locked. It was gone, replaced by a smooth wall. "Ryan!" she shouted. "Hold on!" Ryan grunted. The wall shivered. A door frame appeared, sketching itself into existence from wireframe to solid reality in a second. Ilara burst through it, sprinting back into the chaos of the party. Vance grabbed her arm, and they vanished into the service tunnels. The safe house was a forgotten luxury apartment in the lower city, dusty and smelling of stale perfume, but secure. They collapsed into the main room. The adrenaline that had sustained them through the 3 missions evaporated, leaving them shaking and raw. "We have it," Vance said, placing the drive on the table. "The history, the orders, the money. It is all here." He looked at Ilara, then at Ryan, who had slumped onto a sofa, his face gray, the blue scar dim and flickering. "I need to secure the perimeter," Vance said quietly. He walked to the door, checked the lock, and then turned his back to the room, standing guard. He was giving them space. It was an act of profound discipline. Ilara went to Ryan. She knelt beside him, reaching out to touch his face. His skin was burning hot. "You are hurting," she said. "It is just noise," Ryan whispered, leaning into her touch. "The universe does not like being told what to do. It pushes back." Ilara looked at him, seeing the toll the causality engine had taken. He was thinner, sharper, etched with the trauma of the abyss. But his eyes were the same. They were the eyes that had looked at her across a crowded ballroom 5 years ago and promised her a world without walls. She pulled him up, guiding him to the bedroom in the back. It was simple, unadorned, a refuge. Ryan sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at her, and for the first time since his return, he looked afraid, not of the war or the council, but of the quiet. "Ilara," he said, I am not whole anymore. There are parts of me that are still stuck in the black box, parts of me that are cold." Ilara stood between his knees. She took his hands and placed them on her waist. "I do not need you to be whole, Ryan. I need you to be here." She kissed him. It wasn't the tentative, fearful kiss of their reunion. It was a claiming. It was a desperate, hungry collision of two people who had been starving for years. Ryan made a sound low in his throat, a mix of a groan and a sob. He pulled her down onto the bed with him. The intimacy that followed was not a performance of romance. It was a conversation spoken in skin and breath. They moved together with a frantic urgency, trying to bridge the gap of 5 years in a single hour. Ryan's touch was reverent, almost terrified, as if he expected her to shatter. Ilara met his hesitation with fierceness. She kissed the scar on his face. She traced the lines of the strange alien circuitry embedded in his shoulder. She wanted all of him, the man he was, and the weapon he had been forced to become. It was an act of rebellion, in a world that wanted to use her body as a treaty and his body as a scapegoat. This choice, this pleasure, this closeness was the only freedom they had. "I thought I lost you," she whispered against his skin. "You can't lose me," Ryan answered, his voice steadying, the chaotic static fading from his aura. "I am a fixed point. You are my constant." They lay together in the aftermath, tangled in the sheets, breathing the same air. The fear of the future was still there, waiting outside the door. But in this room, in this bed, they were untouchable. Vance stood in the other room, staring at the door. He could hear the soft murmurs, the shift of weight. He felt a sharp, twisting pang in his chest. Jealousy. Yes, he was a man, and Ilara was a woman who commanded respect and admiration. He had grown to care for her in a way he hadn't expected. But he closed his eyes and breathed through it. He remembered Sarah, the girl from the farm. He remembered that love wasn't about possession. It wasn't about locking someone in a tower or a treaty. It was about wanting them to be free, even if that freedom didn't include you. He chose principle. He chose to be the shield, so they could be the heart. The peace was shattered 2 hours later. The lights in the apartment turned red. A siren wailed, cutting through the silence like a knife. Vance was moving before the first echo faded. He kicked the bedroom door open. "Get up, we are compromised." Ilara and Ryan scrambled out of bed, grabbing their clothes. Ryan's eyes were wide, the blue light flaring back to life. "How did they find us?" Ilara asked, pulling her dress on. "They didn't track us," Vance said, checking his scanner. "They tracked the data drive. It had a quantum beacon embedded in the encryption." "I should have seen that," Ryan cursed, pulling his flight suit up. "I should have seen the probability." "You were distracted," Vance said, tossing him his causality device. "Don't apologize. Just get ready." The front door of the apartment blew inward with a deafening concussive blast. Debris rained down. Armored figures swarmed through the smoke, Royal Guard and Coalition Special Ops, moving in a unified kill team. "Surrender!" a voice boomed. Ilara stood tall, flanked by Vance and Ryan. She looked at the soldiers. "We are not surrendering. she said. Vance raised his rifle. Ryan raised his hand, the air rippling around his fingers. "We are leaving," Vance said. The palace lockdown had begun. The trap was sprung, but the conspirators had made one fatal mistake. They thought they had trapped a princess, a traitor, and a soldier. They didn't realize they had trapped a revolution. The Cathedral of the Celestial Axis was less a place of worship and more a monument to intimidation. Its vaulted ceiling soared 3,000 feet into the artificial atmosphere of the station, supported by pillars of transparent aluminum that shimmered with the projected starlight of the 12 sectors. The aisle was a mile of red velvet, flanked by 5,000 dignitaries, generals, and aristocrats, each one a silent cog in the machine that was grinding the galaxy toward war. High Diplomat Alara Val Ryan stood at the great bronze doors. Her gown was a masterpiece of oppression. It was woven from heavy brocade and stiffened with platinum wire, encrusted with enough jewels to buy a small moon. The train dragged behind her like an anchor. The veil over her face was a mesh of diamond dust, designed to catch the light and obscure her humanity. She felt less like a bride and more like a sacrificial offering wrapped in expensive foil. Beside her, General Vance stood in his dress whites. He looked like a statue cast in iron. His jaw was set so hard a muscle twitched beneath his ear. He offered her his arm. It was not a romantic gesture, it was a tactical one. He was steadying her. "Ready?" Vance asked, his voice a low rumble that did not carry beyond the veil. Ilara looked up at the massive altar at the far end of the hall, where the high priests and the conspirators waited. She saw Admiral Graves standing in the front row, his chest puffed out like a mating avian. She saw High Lord Zar, his alien eyes glittering with anticipation. "I am ready," Ilara said. Her voice was steady. The fear that had plagued her for weeks was gone, burned away by the cold clarity of the plan. "Then let us walk," Vance said. The doors groaned open. The organ music swelled, a deafening crash of synthetic chords that vibrated in the floorboards. They stepped forward. Flashbulbs detonated like distant artillery. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense and nervous sweat. As they walked, Ilara scanned the crowd. She saw the faces of the people she was trying to save, the minor nobles, the junior officers, the terrified civilians watching from the galleries. They looked hopeful. They believed the lie. They believed this marriage would stop the dying. They had no idea that the order to fire had already been drafted. High above, in the shadowed arches of the ceiling, the conspirator's sniper adjusted his scope. He was not there to kill the bride or the groom. He was there to fire a shot that would graze the general's shoulder. A Sylphan assassination attempt that would justify the immediate arrest of the Sylphan delegation and the declaration of martial law. Ilara felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her lungs. Every step was a battle against the instinct to run. They reached the altar. The high priest, a towering figure in robes of shifting chromatic silk, raised his hands. The music died away, leaving a silence that felt heavy and brittle. "Citizens of the coalition, children of the ascendancy," the priest intoned, his voice amplified to fill the cavernous space. "We stand here at the precipice of history, behind the altar." Admiral Graves caught the eye of the sniper in the rafters. He gave a microscopic nod. It was the signal. But before the sniper could depress the trigger, the air inside the cathedral changed. It was not a sound, but a feeling. A sudden drop in pressure, as if the entire station had just plunged underwater. The light coming through the transparent pillars shifted from star white to a deep, bruising purple. A hum began. It started low, barely audible, and rose in pitch until it resonated in the teeth of every person in the hall. Then, the screens changed. There were 50 massive holographic screens lining the walls of the cathedral, intended to broadcast the vows to the waiting billions. In an instant, the image of Ilara and Vance vanished. Static roared, white and jagged. Then, a face appeared on every screen. It was not Ryan. It was Admiral Graves. But it was not the Graves standing in the front row. It was a Graves from 3 weeks ago, sitting in his private office, holding a glass of whiskey. The image was crystal clear. The audio perfect. The casualty projections are acceptable, the recording of Graves said, his voice booming through the cathedral. We lose 10,000 ground troops in the first assault. Who cares? It clears the payroll. The important thing is that we secure the iridium mines before the Sylphans realize we have breached the treaty. A collective gasp went through the crowd. It sounded like all the oxygen being sucked out of the room. In the front row, the real Admiral Graves went pale. He tapped his comm link frantically. Cut the feed! Cut it now! But the feed did not cut. It fractured, splitting into a mosaic of damning evidence. On the left screens, High Lord Tsar appeared, speaking to a group of arms dealers. The princess is a convenient symbol, Tsar sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. We will let her play house with the human general for a month. Then, we arrange a tragedy. A grieving empire fights harder than a hopeful one. On the right screens, a spreadsheet scrolled rapidly, highlighting transfers of billions of credits from the defense budget into private offshore accounts owned by the men standing at the altar. It was the impossible reveal. Ryan was not just playing a file. He was using the causality engine to force the truth into the present moment. He was pulling the private, hidden reality of the conspirators and overlaying it onto the public present. The recording wasn't just on the screens, it was echoing from the walls, vibrating from the floor. It was a truth so heavy it could not be ignored. Graves spun around, his face twisted in a rictus of fury and panic. He pointed a trembling finger at Vance. He is doing this, Graves screamed. The general is working with the terrorists. Arrest him. Kill the alien witch. The doors to the sacristy burst open. 2 squads of Graves' personal elite guard, the Black Guard, rushed out, weapons raised. They were not aiming for arrest. They were aiming to purge. Vance did not flinch. He turned to the main body of the cathedral, where the honor guard of the 7th Fleet, his soldiers, stood at attention. 7th Fleet, Vance bellowed, his voice cutting through the chaos like a command from God. You have heard the evidence. These men are not your leaders. They are war criminals. The captain of the honor guard looked at Graves, then at Vance. He looked at the screens, where Graves was laughing about sacrificing soldiers for profit. The captain drew his weapon, but he did not aim it at Vance. He aimed it at the Black Guard. Defend the general, the captain shouted. Defend the peace. The cathedral erupted. It was a scene of spectacular violence amidst oppressive luxury. Blaster fire scorched the velvet tapestries. The Black Guard opened fire, and the 7th Fleet returned it. Screams filled the air as dignitaries scrambled for cover, diving under pews and behind marble statues. Ilara stood amidst the madness. She did not run. She reached up and tore the diamond veil from her face. She ripped the heavy train from her dress, discarding the weight of the tradition that had tried to bury her. She spotted a cluster of terrified civilians, waiters, flower girls, and junior aides, cowering near the altar rail. A Black Guard trooper, firing blindly, turned his weapon toward them. Ilara moved. She didn't have a weapon, but she had the microphone stand. She swung the heavy brass rod with all the force of her pent-up rage, striking the trooper across the helmet. He crumbled. She grabbed the microphone. It was still live, connected to the emergency broadcast system that Ryan had hijacked. Citizens, Ilara shouted. Her voice boomed over the sound of plasma fire, heard not just in the hall but on every ship and planet watching the feed. "Look at them," she pointed to Graves and Czar, who were cowering behind a kinetic shield generator their bodyguards had deployed. "They told you this war was for survival," she cried out, her voice cracking with emotion but holding firm. "They told you it was for honor. But look at the screens. It was for profit. They sold your children's lives for mineral rights." A second wave of Blackguard troopers breached the eastern windows, rappelling down on gravlines. They were flanking Vance's position. Vance was fighting with a calculated brutality. He had discarded his ceremonial jacket and was dual-wielding plasma pistols, moving between the pillars with the grace of a dancer. But there were too many of them. "General! Watch your left!" Ilara screamed. Vance ducked as a vibro blade sheared through the stone where his head had been a second ago. He rolled, coming up to fire a point-blank shot into the attacker's chest. Then, the shadows moved. Ryan appeared. He didn't enter through a door. He simply unfolded from the space behind the altar. The air around him was screaming, a high-pitched tear in the fabric of reality. The causality engine strapped to his chest was glowing with a blinding, unstable white light. "Stop," Ryan said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The word rippled out from him like a physical wave. A squad of Blackguard rushed him, firing fully automatic plasma bursts. Ryan raised his hand. He didn't block the shots. He changed the probability of their trajectory. The bolts of superheated energy curved in midair, bending around him like water flowing around a stone, and slammed into the ceiling. The soldiers froze, staring at the impossible physics. Ryan clenched his fist. The floor beneath the Blackguard squad turned to liquid, then back to stone in a nanosecond. The soldiers were trapped, encased in the rock up to their waists, their weapons useless. The beloved had returned, and he was terrifying. Commander Voss, a rival officer who had long served as Graves' enforcer, stepped forward. He was a giant of a man, clad in heavy-powered armor that whirred with hydraulic strength. He held a massive rotary cannon. He ignored Ryan and aimed directly at Vance. "Traitor!" Voss roared. Vance looked at him. Voss was the man who had taught him strategy at the academy. "You chose the wrong side, Voss," Vance said sadly. Voss fired. Vance moved, but not fast enough. The shockwave of the explosion threw him backward into the altar. He groaned, blood trickling from his nose. Voss stomped forward, raising his boot to crush Vance's chest. Suddenly, Ilara was there. She didn't have the strength to fight a man in power armor, but she had something else. She threw a small metal disc, the frequency jammer they had stolen from the relay station, onto Voss's back. "Ryan!" she screamed. "The frequency!" Ryan saw it. He couldn't kill Voss without risking a reality tear that might swallow the room. He had to be precise. He focused. The blue veins on his face turned stark white. He reached out and twisted his hand, not manipulating the man, but the probability of the jammer's battery life. He accelerated the entropy of the battery. The jammer spiked with 1,000 years of energy discharge in 1 second. It sent a massive electromagnetic pulse directly into Voss's suit. The power armor seized up. The hydraulics locked. Voss was frozen, a statue in a metal coffin. Vance rolled out from under the boot. He stood up, wiping the blood from his face. He picked up his pistol and pressed it against Voss's helmet. "Yield," Vance ordered. Voss, trapped and powerless, snarled but deactivated his weapon systems. The fighting began to die down. The 7th Fleet had overwhelmed the remaining Blackguard. The room was filled with smoke and the smell of ozone. Admiral Graves and High Lord Czar stood alone near the back exit, their escape blocked by a wall of fire that Ryan had conjured from a spilled candelabra. fire that burned cold and blue. "It is over," Graves spat, trying to maintain his dignity even as his empire crumbled. "You have destroyed the government. You have left a power vacuum that will consume us all." Ilara stepped forward. She looked like a warrior queen, her dress torn, her hair wild, her eyes blazing. "We did not destroy the government," she said, her voice ringing clear in the silence. "We destroyed the lie." She turned to the cameras, which were still broadcasting to a stunned galaxy. "I was ordered to marry General Vance," she said. "They told me it was the only path to peace. They lied. Peace is not a contract signed in the dark by men who profit from war. Peace is the refusal to kill for their bottom line." She looked at Vance, who was standing guard over the prisoners. She looked at Ryan, who was leaning against the altar, his body shaking from the strain of holding reality together. "They tried to make me a symbol," she continued, "so I will be one not of submission but of choice." Suddenly, the causality engine on Ryan's chest let out a shriek. Ryan doubled over, clutching his heart. The white light flared, turning angry and red. The reality around him began to fracture. The stone floor turned into glass, then into water, then into void. "Ryan!" Ilara cried, running to him. "Stay back!" Ryan gasped. "It is overloading. The paradox. It is too much." He looked at the conspirators. He looked at the fleet overhead. He had enough power in the engine to wipe them all out. He could erase Graves from history. He could undo the last 10 years of war. It would be easy. It would be clean. But it would be madness. It would be the logic of a god, not a man. Ryan looked at Ilara. She was reaching for him, ignoring the distortion field that was starting to disintegrate the hem of her dress. He saw the fear in her eyes. Not fear of him, but fear for him. He made his choice. He gritted his teeth and forced the energy inward. He didn't release it. He swallowed it. He took the paradox into his own body to spare the room. The pain was absolute. It felt like dying 1,000 times in a single second. Ilara grabbed his shoulders, anchoring him. "Look at me, Ryan, look at me!" Ryan focused on her face. It was the only real thing in a world that was melting. "I am here," he whispered. The red light faded. The distortion collapsed. Ryan fell to his knees, the engine smoking and dead on his chest. Vance was there instantly, covering them, making sure the perimeter held. The room was silent. The coup was broken. The conspirators were in irons. The truth was out. Ilara knelt on the floor of the cathedral, holding the man who had walked through hell to find her. She looked up at the cameras, her face streaked with soot and tears, but radiant with a fierce, untouchable power. She delivered the words that would be etched into the history books of 2 worlds. "He returned with a revenge beyond logic," she said, her voice trembling with the aftershocks of the adrenaline. "So I could finally choose a love beyond fear." Vance looked at them. He holstered his weapon. He looked at the troops who were waiting for orders. "Secure the building," Vance said quietly, "and get a medic. The war is over." But as the medics rushed in, a low, ominous warning chime began to sound from the device on Ryan's chest. It wasn't the sound of power. It was the sound of critical failure. "The engine is fused," Ryan whispered, his voice weak. "It is leaking temporal radiation. If we do not get it to the containment zone, this whole station becomes a hole in the universe." Ilara looked at Vance. The fight was done, but the survival had just begun. "Get the ship," she ordered. Vance nodded. On it. The wedding was over. The reception would be a race against the collapse of time itself. The broadcast ended, but the signal did not stop. It reverberated through the subspace relays, bouncing from satellite to satellite, carrying the undeniable frequency of truth. Across the galaxy, the reaction was not a ripple, it was a tidal wave. On the industrial moon of Aurum Prime, factory workers laid down their hydrospanners and walked out of the assembly lines that were building the new dreadnoughts. In the high spires of the Sylphan homeworld, the lesser nobility, long suppressed by the Shadow Council, stormed the databanks of the ministry, demanding the release of the unredacted budget reports. The panic of the war profiteers was immediate and absolute. It was a beautiful thing to watch. Men who had spent decades treating solar systems like poker chips were suddenly scrambling to liquidate assets that no longer held value. Ilara stood on the observation deck of the station, looking down at the chaos of the docking bay. Ships were fleeing, contractors, lobbyists, and compromised admirals trying to outrun the consequences of their own ambition. But they were not fast enough. Coalition security cutters, now under the direct command of officers loyal to the truth, were intercepting them, tractor beams locking onto the gilded yachts of the fleeing elite. She was no longer just a diplomat. In the span of an hour, she had become something far more dangerous to the old order, a symbol. She was the woman who had walked into the fire and refused to burn. General Vance stepped up beside her. He had cleaned the blood from his face, but his dress uniform was still scorched from the plasma fire in the cathedral. He looked out at the fleet, his expression grim but satisfied. "The Admiralty Board has resigned," Vance said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "The junior officers have taken command. They are hailing us. They want orders. Give them orders," Ilara said without turning. "Tell them to stand down. Tell them the war is cancelled." Vance nodded. He tapped a command into the console, projecting a holographic document into the air between them. It was a draft, hasty and rough, but it was the foundation of something new. "I am calling it the Treaty of Ophiuchus Revised," Vance said. "No marriage clauses, no exchange of biological assets." "What is the core tenet?" Ilara asked, reading the scrolling text. "Mutual defense based on voluntary participation," Vance replied. "And transparent oversight, a civilian council made up of representatives from both worlds, with full access to military logistics. No more black budgets, no more shadow wars. It is ambitious," Ilara noted. "The traditionalists will hate it." "Let them hate it," Vance said. "The alternative is a firing squad. I think they will find the motivation to compromise." Ilara turned to look at him. "You are a good man, Kalen. I am sorry I was forced on you." Vance offered a rare, genuine smile. "I am not. If you had not been forced on me, I would have likely followed orders until the day I died. You woke me up, Ilara." Their moment of quiet victory was interrupted by a sharp, agonized sound from behind them. Ryan was sitting on a bench near the airlock, his head in his hands. The causality engine strapped to his chest was pulsing with a sickly, erratic rhythm. Thump, hiss, thump, hiss. The light it cast was no longer the clean white of probability or the angry red of power. It was a bruised, toxic violet that seemed to rot the air it touched. Ilara was at his side in an instant. "Ryan?" He looked up. His skin was translucent, the veins beneath showing dark and sluggish. The blue scar on his face was weeping a substance that looked like liquid mercury. "It is not stopping," Ryan whispered, his teeth chattering. "The feedback loop." I swallowed the paradox. "Ilara, but I cannot digest it. It is eating the containment field." Vesper, who had been hovering anxiously with a medical scanner, looked at the readout and paled. "My lady, the radiation levels are spiking. It is not gamma or theta. It is chronometric decay. The engine is aging everything around it." "Look at the bench." Ilara looked. The metal bench Ryan was sitting on was rusting before their eyes, flaking away into orange dust. "If that thing breaches," Vance said, stepping closer, the Geiger counter clicking furiously, "it will not just kill him. It will create a localized event horizon. It will eat the station." Ryan tried to stand, but his legs buckled. He grabbed Ilara's arm to steady himself, and she felt a shock of cold so intense it burned. "I have to go," Ryan gasped. "I have to take it away from here." "Where?" Ilara demanded, holding him up. "Where can you go that it will not destroy?" "The dead zone," Ryan said. "The center of the Colas wormhole. The singularity there is stable. If I detonate the engine inside the event horizon, the gravity well will crush the paradox before it can unravel the universe." "That is a one-way trip," Vance said bluntly. "No ship can survive the pressure gradient of the dead zone." "I can," Ryan said. "I can bend the hull integrity. I can make the probability of crushing zero, just long enough to drop the package." "And then?" Ilara asked, her voice rising. "And then I try to come back," Ryan said. "But I cannot do it alone. I need a pilot to hold the ship steady while I interface with the core." "I will fly it," Vance said immediately. "No," Ryan said, shaking his head. "It has to be someone who anchors me, someone the timeline recognizes as a constant." He looked at Ilara. Ilara didn't hesitate. "Prepare the ship. General. We are going for a ride." The Starpiercer was a prototype interceptor, small, fast, and stripped of all non-essential weight. It shot out of the station's docking bay like a silver needle, banking hard toward the swirling, multicolored bruise in space that was the Colas wormhole. Inside the cockpit, the roar of the engines was deafening. Ilara sat in the pilot's seat, her hands white-knuckled on the yoke. Ryan sat in the navigator's chair beside her, connected to the ship's systems by a web of cables he had jury-rigged from the engine on his chest. Vance was on the comms from the station, his voice crackling through the interference. "You are approaching the accretion disk. Gravitational shear is increasing by 300%. Structure is holding, but barely. Keep us steady." "Ilara," Ryan murmured, his eyes closed, his mind deep in the machine. The view outside the canopy shifted. The stars elongated into streaks of light, then shattered into a kaleidoscope of impossible colors. They were entering the throat of the wormhole. Physics began to scream. The dashboard hurried through a series of alarms, then went dark. The ship was no longer flying on aerodynamics or thrust. It was flying on Ryan's will. "We are in the echo chamber," Ryan warned. "Do not look at the windows." Ilara looked. She couldn't help it. Outside the glass, the swirling mists of the wormhole began to take shapes. They were not random patterns. They were scenes. They were moments that had never happened, and moments that might yet come to pass. To her left, she saw a vision of herself standing on a balcony in the royal palace. She was older, her face lined with a bitter resignation. She was wearing a crown of heavy iron. Beside her stood General Vance, looking cold and distant. In this reflection, she had submitted. She had married him. The conspiracy had succeeded, and the peace was a suffocating blanket over a galaxy of slaves. She was a tragic icon, a queen who had traded her soul for quiet. To her right, she saw another vision, fire, endless fire. She saw herself standing on the bridge of a warship, Ryan at her side. But this Ryan was a monster, consumed by the engine, a god of chaos, and she was his high priestess, ordering the bombardment of Earth. In this reflection, she had burned everything down to save him, becoming the destroyer the Council feared. The visions whispered to her, safety. The left one promised, power. The right one seduced. Ilara squeezed her eyes shut. No, She gripped the yoke. "I am not a pawn," she shouted into the roaring silence of the cockpit. "And I am not a destroyer." She pushed the throttle forward, driving the ship straight down the center of the tunnel, between the two nightmares. "I am a builder." The ship shuddered violently as it broke through the membrane of the visions. They were in the dead zone now, a pocket of absolute stillness in the center of the storm. "We are here," Ryan said. His voice was weak, barely a breath. He began to unbuckle the straps of the engine. The device was screaming now, a high-pitched whine that threatened to shatter their eardrums. "I have to lock it in the ejection tube," Ryan said. He stumbled out of the chair, dragging the heavy machinery. Ilara engaged the autopilot and scrambled after him. They stood at the airlock of the small cargo chute. Ryan's hands were shaking so badly he couldn't punch in the code. Ilara reached out and did it for him. The inner door slid open. The chute was a dark maw waiting to swallow the poison. Ryan looked at her. The violet light from the engine illuminated his face, making him look like a ghost. "Ilara," he said, "when I let this go, I let the power go. I will not be able to bend reality anymore. I will not be able to fix things with a wave of my hand. I will just be a man, broken and tired." Ilara took his face in her hands. She looked past the glowing scars, past the trauma of the black box, into the eyes of the person she had loved since before the war began. "I never loved the god, Ryan. I loved the navigator. I loved the man who showed me the stars, not the man who tried to rewrite them." "But what if I am not enough?" Ryan asked, the vulnerability cracking his voice. "What if I cannot protect you without this?" "Real love is not about protection," Ilara said fiercely. "It is about partnership. I do not need a savior. I need you. Just you." She leaned in and kissed him. It was a kiss of finality and commencement. It was a seal on a new contract, one written not in ink or blood, but in trust. In that moment, surrounded by the crushing gravity of a singularity, they found a center of gravity in each other. It was an act of fierce tenderness. Two people who had been used by systems designed to break them, choosing to remain soft enough to love. "Do it," Ilara whispered against his lips. Ryan nodded. He unclipped the final magnetic lock. The engine detached from his chest with a sickening lurch, as if he were pulling out his own heart. He shoved it into the chute and slammed the manual release. The outer door opened. The vacuum of the dead zone sucked the engine out. "Seal it!" Ryan screamed. Ilara slammed the emergency close button. Through the viewport, they saw the engine drift away into the darkness. Then, it imploded. It didn't explode outward. It collapsed inward, folding space into a knot so tight it vanished from existence. The shockwave hit the ship a second later. "Hold on!" Vance shouted over the comms. "I am pulling you out." The Starpiercer was yanked backward by a tractor beam from the Aegis, which had moved dangerously close to the wormhole's mouth. The G-forces were crushing. Ilara blacked out, her hand still gripping Ryan's. She woke up in the infirmary of the Aegis. The lights were soft and white. The hum of the engines was normal, steady. She sat up. Ryan was in the bed next to her. He was asleep, hooked up to a dozen monitors. The blue scar on his face was gone, replaced by a thin white line of ordinary healed tissue. The violet aura was gone. He looked peaceful. General Vance was sitting in a chair between the beds, reading a data pad. He looked up when she stirred. "Welcome back," Vance said. "Did we make it?" Ilara asked, her voice raspy. "We made it," Vance confirmed. "The wormhole is stable. The engine is gone. And according to the medical droids, your friend there is going to live, though he will likely have a headache for the next decade." Ilara looked at Ryan, relief washing over her like a warm tide. Vance stood up. He looked at the two of them. There was no jealousy in his eyes anymore. There was only respect. The kind of respect soldiers give to those who have survived the trenches. "I have already submitted my report to the new council," Vance said. "I omitted the part about the time travel and the alternate realities. I told them we disposed of a dangerously unstable weapon prototype. It seemed simpler." "Thank you," Ilara said. Vance adjusted his uniform jacket. He stood at attention and offered a sharp, crisp salute. Not to a superior officer, and not to a princess, but to an equal. "You saved the peace, Ilara, you and him. You are the co-authors of this treaty now. I am just the guardian." He turned and walked to the door, pausing before he left. "Get some rest. We arrive at the homeworld in 4 hours. You have a speech to give." The recovery room was quiet for a long time, until the door slid open and Vesper walked in, followed by Lieutenant Miller. They were carrying a basket of fruit and a bottle of smuggled wine. "You are alive," Vesper declared, setting the basket down. "I won the pool. The kitchen staff bet 10-1 you would implode." "You gambled on our survival?" Ilara asked, raising an eyebrow. "I have to diversify my income," Vesper said, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "Being a royal attendant is high risk, low reward." Miller sat on the edge of Vance's empty chair, looking surprisingly cheerful. "It has been a weird week. I shot a general, hijacked a dreadnought, and helped write a constitution. My mother wanted me to be a dentist." "You should write a book," Vesper suggested. "I am thinking about it," Miller grinned. "How to Survive a Wedding Coup, a guide for the heavily armed. It will be a bestseller." Vesper agreed. Chapter 1. Don't wear heels to a firefight. Ryan stirred in his bed. He opened his eyes. They were dark, clear, and devoid of the abyss. He looked at Ilara, then at the wine. "Is that for me?" he croaked. "Only if you promise not to turn it into vinegar with your mind," Vesper said. Ryan smiled. It was a weak smile, but it was real. "I think my days of turning water into wine are over. I am stuck with regular physics now." Ilara took the glass and held it to his lips. "Regular physics suits you," she said softly. 6 months later, the Grand Council chamber was a different place. The shadows were gone, banished by walls of clear glass that let the sunlight of the neutral world flood the room. Ilara stood at the central podium. She was not wearing a veil. She was not wearing armor. She wore a simple tunic of sylvan silk, embroidered with the symbols of both worlds. Around her sat the representatives of the new alliance: humans, sylphans, miners, teachers, soldiers. It was messy. It was loud. They argued about trade tariffs and zoning laws. It was not the silent, terrifying order of the Shadow Council. It was the chaotic, beautiful noise of democracy. Ryan sat in the gallery. He was working as a consultant for the Civilian Navigation Authority, helping to map safe routes through the sector. He looked healthy, happy. He caught her eye and winked. General Vance stood by the door, arms crossed, watching the proceedings with a watchful eye. He was the Supreme Commander of the Joint Defense Force now, but his job was to ensure that the military served the Council, not the other way around. Ilara tapped the microphone. The room quieted. "We have a lot of work to do today," she began. "The logistics of the grain shipment to the Outer Rim are still unresolved." A human representative raised his hand. "But Madam President, what about the security guarantees? How do we know the peace will hold?" Ilara looked at the representative. She looked at Vance, the guardian. She looked at Ryan, the partner. "We do not know," Ilara said honestly. "Peace is not a guarantee. It is a choice we have to make every single day. It is not sealed by a marriage, or a bomb, or a threat. She looked out at the assembly. It is sealed by truth, by the willingness to share the risk, and by the fierce dignity of choosing a future that honors both our hearts and our consciences. She smiled. Now, about those grain shipments. The session began. The work continued. Outside the window, the stars burned steady and bright. They were no longer cold, and they were no longer burning with the fires of war. They were just stars, lighting the way for a galaxy that had finally learned that the bravest revolution of all was not conquering an enemy, but choosing empathy after discovering every reason to hate. Ilara Valryan, the woman who was ordered to marry a general, looked down at her datapad and began to build